Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
Researchers can be a bit sniffy about attention. There's this understandable belief that good work should speak for itself. Do the research properly, publish it in the right journal, and the people who need to know about it will find it. Sometimes they will, but quite often they will not. There's an enormous amount of research being published alongside reports, conferences, newsletters, webinars and podcasts. Everybody's competing for a limited amount of attention, including people whose work is not especially good, but who are much better at telling you about it. That may be unfair, but it's also the situation we are in. I spend much of my working life trying to get people to notice research and, more importantly, the people doing it. Dementia Researcher publishes blogs, records podcasts, runs events, promotes jobs and funding calls. And when all that is done, I look at the figures to see whether any of it worked. Sometimes a podcast that took days to prepare attracts almost no interest, while something fairly simple takes off for reasons I simply can't explain. To this day, I still don't know why our I As a Biomarker podcast got 17,000 plays in a single month, almost a year after it was first published. On the other hand, however, I probably can guess why our recent show, Relay Live, Sex, Gender and FTD in Focus, did so well. Think about that for a second. It just goes to show that attention does not always go where it is deserved. I can understand why some researchers then would rather keep their distance from the whole business. They do not want to chase likes, produce clickbait, or turn themselves into a personal brand. They just want to get on with the research. Fair enough. But avoiding the attention economy sadly doesn't make it disappear. It just leaves other people to occupy that space. Research only has value beyond the research team when somebody else knows it exists. That might be another academic, a clinician, a policymaker, a charity, or someone directly affected by the issues being studied. All of those people are busy, and very few are just sitting around waiting for your latest paper to appear. You have to really give them a reason to notice it. I'm not suggesting that this means dancing on TikTok beside a graph of your results, although I do know people that do that. What it does mean is accepting that communication is part of the research process. Publishing the paper is not the end of the job, it's the point where the work of getting the findings read and used actually begins. Most people do not care about a study simply because it's been published. Researchers care about the method, sample and analysis, and everybody else usually starts somewhere more basic. Like, why does this matter? Who does it affect? What might change because of it? And those are not silly questions, or evidence that people really need research dumbed down. They're how people decide whether to keep reading, and that's even simpler than a lay summary or an abstract. Academic communications often gets the order wrong. It begins with the full project title, the funder, the institution involved, and a lengthy explanation of the methods. Or even worse, yet another definition of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. The reason anybody should care appears somewhere around paragraph 8. And you see the same thing at conferences, where somebody has 10 minutes to explain 3 years of work and spends the first 4 minutes describing the structure of the presentation. And by the time they reach the really interesting part, half of the room's checking their emails and staring at their phones. So start with why the work matters and then explain how you did it. That doesn't mean exaggerating the findings or pretending an association is a cure. There's already enough of that about. It means making the value of the work easier to see while being clear about what the study can and cannot tell us. Trust me, try it. Next time you're presenting, start with the headlines and work backwards. Don't save the results for the end and just see how the audience reacts. Researchers also need to become more comfortable with repetition. Let me explain. By the time a paper's published, the research team may have been discussing it for years. They have written the abstract, argued about the figures, and presented early versions at several meetings, and they're probably absolutely sick of it. But it's important to remember that for everybody else, they're just seeing it for the first time. Posting about a paper once on LinkedIn is not much of a communications plan. It is placing one message into a very fast-moving stream and hoping that the right person happens to be looking at the exact moment you hit send. You can talk about the same work more than once without becoming tedious. Explain the main findings, discuss something unexpected, or focus on what the results mean for a particular group. It may feel repetitive to you, but most of the people you are trying to reach probably missed it the first time around. The paper's not the only version of the research either. It is there for people who need the full detail, but others may need a short explanation or an infographic. I love Notebook LM for doing this. Or they may need a presentation or some slides, or it simplified into a podcast or a conversation. And this can happen not just at the time, but even in the weeks and months that follow. Some academics worry that simplifying research removes the complexity. And it's true, it can if it's done badly. But complexity should not become an excuse for being impossible to understand. Good communication can include uncertainty. You can say that a sample was small, that the findings are early, or more work is needed. People can cope with uncertainty when it's explained properly. What they struggle with, though, is being asked to decode a paragraph written for 3 reviewers and for nobody else. I also think researchers need to remember that people respond to people. Academic writing removes most signs of the person behind it, which is appropriate for a paper, but it doesn't really need to carry over into everything else. Outside the paper, you can take time to explain why you became interested in the question, or what surprised you, or how an early assumption turned out to be wrong, and none of that ever makes the research process less serious. It just makes it easier to understand and remember. It turns it into a story, and this matters for careers as well as research impact. People often talk about networking as though it means standing at a conference reception trying to join a circle of academics who've arranged themselves so that there's no obvious way in. But it really can be much simpler. Someone reads a post, remembers your name. They hear you explain your work on a podcast or attend a webinar where you ask a useful question. Months later, they're putting together a project and they think of you. Also, I can prove this, but you're going to have to wait a few months and watch this space for a paper I'm working on, where we looked at how researchers have benefited from writing blogs and joining our podcasts or presenting in the Dementia Researcher salon. Of course, all of this is not guaranteed route to a job or a grant, and anyone promising that 10 LinkedIn posts will transform your career is talking rubbish. But visibility helps people understand what you do, and that matters when collaborations and opportunities are being discussed. The aim's not to become generally well known. Academic fame is a fairly disappointing sort of fame anyway. You might have thousands of followers and still need to explain your job to your family at Christmas. But I think being known for something specific is a good thing. What do you want to be known for? I'll give you an example. Tell the truth. When you think of centenarian studies, which is the name that immediately comes to mind? I'll bet you it's a certain person from UMC Amsterdam. And when somebody needs a particular skill, a perspective, or a bit of knowledge, they should have some chance of thinking of you, if that's the thing you want to be known for. And that usually comes from talking consistently about the work you're already doing rather than inventing an online personality. You can have several interests, but it helps to give people a clear starting point. Of course, there are limits to all this. Researchers can spend so much time talking about their work, they have very little time left to actually do it. And universities can also confuse visibility with impact because attention is easy to count. A post with 50,000 views looks impressive in a report. A conversation with the right group of clinicians may change practice, but leave no useful figures behind. So remember, sometimes reaching the right 20 people may matter more than 20,000 random people. I tell myself this, honestly, every time I look at some of the numbers for our webinars. It all depends on what you were trying to achieve. That's the most useful question to ask before posting anything. What do I want to happen because somebody sees this? Do you want researchers to read the paper, participants to join the study, clinicians to use a resource that you've created, or potential collaborators get in touch? Raising awareness is often used when nobody has worked out the answer. Once you know what you want to happen, the rest becomes easier. You know who you need to reach and what they need from you. You may discover that social media is not the right answer after all. A direct email may be better, or a conversation with the right organization might do far more, or a podcast even. Tapping into the attention economy does not mean doing whatever the algorithm rewards that week. It means understanding that attention is usually the first step towards somebody reading, listening, or responding, or acting. Researchers are trained to produce knowledge. They receive far less help getting that knowledge beyond the people who already agree it's interesting. So I've gone on for too long now, but remember, you do not need to become an influencer, buy a ring light, or develop a personal logo. You do need to make it possible for people to find your work, understand why it matters, and remember who did it. Good research does not always speak for itself. Sometimes it needs a bit of help, and getting it out there might help your career too.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.